Reach into space. ABC News live coverage of the Space Shuttle Columbia continues. Now from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, Frank Reynolds.
The now empty pad. There is the now empty pad. Launch pad 39A here at the Kennedy Space Center. A moment ago we saw a bird just wheeling in a sort of tranquil way around the space pad, or the launch pad. The mission is now 17 minutes and 10 seconds or so underway, and the astronauts, while they soar above, they're out over the Atlantic, well over the Atlantic, approaching actually the Madrid tracking station, I believe. While they do just roar off into space, actually they go into orbit in a series of sort of steps, don't they, Gene?
Yes, the main engine puts them into an orbit, into space effectively, yes, but not into an orbit around the Earth that they could sustain themselves.
So there's a series of burns, as they say, of engine firings, really, that just move them right on up to where they finally want to be and will stay for the full 5 days.
Each, they have small rocket engines. They just put a little bit more energy into the orbit and slowly increase its size till they get it to the point where they want it. In this case, it's going to be about 150 statute miles circular above the Earth.
Yes. Okay, let's go down to Houston now, to Mission Control, or to the Johnson Space Center, and Steve Bell. Steve?
Thank you, Frank. I'm sitting here with Joe Allen, one of the shuttle astronauts. Joe, you've been monitoring the mission control line with the astronauts ever since liftoff. You've got a clock running right to the second here. Have we heard anything in the communications that would indicate anything other than perfect so far?
No, it sounds beautiful. They did have one what I'd call a nuisance alarm, with a computer program that's called a built-in test equipment. They call it BITE. And you may have heard the Capcom say, ignore the BITE message. It's nothing.
All right, in other words, the astronauts were getting a message that there might be a problem.
They got a message that the inertial measurement units were acting a bit funny, but have been since told to ignore that.
All right, what's going on? We know that Houston Control is now in charge of the mission. What exactly are they doing to, I mean, is this all pre-programmed, all computerized, or are men actually making the shuttle do what it's doing?
If it does exactly as it's instructed to do, it is pre-programmed. Mission Control is there to watch that happens, and really is not all that busy until it starts to deviate from that pre-plan.
Primarily a monitoring function at this point.
Yes.
And how about aboard the spacecraft itself, where you've got two astronauts? Is theirs a monitoring mode?
It is to a degree, although they have tasks to carry out now. They have to shut down the APUs, the things we heard so much about in the last few days. They ran the required few minutes time, ran beautifully. They're also shutting down or cleaning up the big engines, making sure all the leftover propellant is dumped out the back end of those engines.
That's done manually?
It's done using switches, yes.
All right, so they're getting ready now for what will be their first major assignment as pilots or as onboard operators.
Really, as you said earlier, to open the payload bay doors, to first of all make sure the computers are instructed with the on-orbit instructions and properly configured for their stay in orbit, and then to open the doors.
What are they thinking by now, that first look at space?
Well, they're busy. They're probably not looking out all that much at the moment, but they'll have plenty of time later on. Yes.
Thank you very much, Joe. Now back to Frank Reynolds at the Cape.
Okay, Steve, thank you. Yes, we just have had an indication that something was 14% high. I missed part of that. What was it?
Well, one of their auxiliary power units that we've heard so much about, they're about ready to shut them down, but the temperature got high on the number 3 unit a little early, and as Joe did, as Dick Truly did, he monitored it. He made a decision on board to shut that number 3 unit down about 10 or 20 seconds early. Appears to be no problem.
Yes, it is important, of course, because they need it, don't they, in order to get back down?
Well, they've got 3 of them, and there's 3 for a purpose. Any 2 could fail, and they could still activate the body flaps, the control surfaces, and the landing gear to get back home.
Well, this mission, of course, will be notable because there will be something very important attempted or demonstrated during this mission, the ability to not only open the doors, but actually to use the arm, the Canadarm, it's called, and there you see an animation of it. It is sort of a long 50-foot metal arm. It has a shoulder, an elbow, a wrist, and a hand of several wire-type contraptions that actually are able to grasp certain objects in space or to lift objects from the cargo bay out into space. So that will be tested this time. They won't actually do any grabbing or any lifting, but they will open the the cargo bay doors and extend the arm out to see how it works. Lynn Scher has prepared a report on just how important that is. It comes to us from Canada. Oh, I'm sorry, she hasn't prepared a report. She's standing right there now with a man who's had a great deal to do with it. And she's on live. Go ahead, Lynn.
Thanks, Frank. I am here with John Roberts. He is the Minister for Science and Technology from Canada, and he is the man who's been responsible for getting this arm made in Canada. Mr. Roberts, what are you going to be doing tomorrow somewhere between 7 and 8 a.m.?
I'm going to be watching on television when the Canadarm, the remote manipulator system, is unsheathed and used on the shuttle for the first time.
Could we say that you're going to be watching with a little anxiety and a little bit of pride? What do you think the feelings are going to be?
Mainly pride, slightly crossed fingers to make sure everything goes all right. It's met the specifications, so we know it's okay. But there's still a bit of doubt as to how the vibration of takeoff may affect it, but we're pretty sure it'll be okay.
You are then confident that there will be no need to jettison at the end, that everything will work all right with it?
99 and 44 100% sure.
Dick truly said one of the things he was looking forward to was operating that arm in near-zero gravity out in space, because it's been very different here on Earth. He said it would be fun. Do you think he'll have fun with it?
I think it'll be a little bit like a kid with an erector set. That magnificent arm will be out there. Television cameras will be attached to it, be able to look at the outside skin of the spacecraft, check the tiles. I think it's going to be a wonderful morning.
What have been your thoughts during this, the 1 week scrub, and then today we didn't quite know there towards the end? Did you have some anxiety?
Well, it heightens the excitement, I guess. Adds a little bit of tension to it.
Did you ever think that the shuttle might not be able to take off because of the weight of the arm? That had been brought up.
No, the arm weighs about 900 pounds. It can lift the whole railway boxcar weight once it's in space. But I don't think that the weight of the arm has ever been a great problem. No worries on that score.
Politically, what does this do to U.S.-Canadian relations, having that arm going up in this craft?
Oh, I think it's a help. There are two things that are really important to us about this. One is the use of Canadian technology, the world's best in this kind of thing. And secondly, it's an example of cooperation between two countries in the space field, and I think that that's an important thing, too. I hope it strengthens Canadian-American relations. They're pretty strong already. Strengthens them further.
Well, tomorrow morning, good luck to you. Good luck to the arm.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Roberts. Frank?
Thank you, Lynn. It's a $100 million arm, and the Canadians have given it to us this time around, although I understand that NASA's going to pay for the others that will come up. Here's a replay of the launch that took place 24 minutes and 20 seconds ago. For those of you who missed it, this is a recording, a replay of the launch. An absolutely flawless launch, too. Watch the rollover now.
Frank, this launch is actually governed by computers on board the spacecraft, although the astronauts can take over manually if they have to. Contrary to a broad misconception that existed even during Gemini and Apollo, the astronauts are not passengers. Once they get in orbit, they are the controllers of the spacecraft. They're assisted greatly by the information from Houston, but they are truly pilots of that spacecraft.
Well, we had some spectacular shots, and here now is the map of the astronauts are in orbit, and they're passing over, it appears to me, Algeria. They'll be going over Libya, the Sudan, and Ethiopia very shortly. And we'll continue with our coverage of the flight of the Space Shuttle after this message and a word from our local stations.
Stay with Channel 7 and be an eyewitness to history. Reach into space. ABC News live coverage of the Space Shuttle Columbia continues. From the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, Frank Reynolds.
And good morning once again. Well, the garage has been empty for about 28 and a half minutes. The bird has flown, and fly she did, as Columbia lifted off at about 10:10 Eastern Time this morning. We want to show you, those of you who may have missed it, and those of you who'd like to see it again, another replay of the launch from the moment of ignition when that great flame and smoke burst out, and here it is.
From the other direction. Different shot. No, there's no.
Here's the liquid rockets.
Yes.
They're up to speed. There come the solid rockets, and she's on the way. And you know that's an exciting moment. It sure doesn't wait.
From ignition to clearing the tower is only about 6 seconds or so.
About 6.5 seconds, and that's a very critical time. In Apollo, I remember, it took us over 15 seconds, and although we had a more powerful engine, we moved very much more slowly.
Oh, and it always seemed to wobble, you know.
Like a
you
telephone
wondered if
pole.
it was ever going to get up there, yeah.
Almost looked sometimes like it would fall over. You don't get the chance with this one because it moves out so quickly.
But this is it's a totally different configuration, and that's why it's so different to see it lifting off that way, you know, with the solid rocket boosters and, of course, that huge external tank that it's all mated to.
It's more the kind of thing, we're familiar with seeing airplanes, and we're beginning to see something, I think all of us out there, seeing something we can more closely identify with. Apollo, a long, big booster with something from outer space. Now I think everyone can associate with the shuttle far more closely than they could with Apollo.
And we'll see it come down, of course, on Tuesday out there in the desert in California at Edwards Air Force Base, where so many of these pilots have spent so many years training and working so very hard to prepare themselves for missions like this. And it was from Edwards, I guess, too, that Joe Engle actually flew the X-15, wasn't it?
Joe's been into space 16 times, so he has his astronaut wings, but I'll tell you, he's re-earning his wings out there today.
Well, I guess since I mentioned Edwards Air Force Base, naturally we're going to have a quick look at Edwards Air Force Base, where we saw a couple of hours ago a truly spectacular dawn over the desert. Looks pretty good there right now, doesn't it, Gene?
Well, let's hope they don't have to use that landing site out there for a few days, but it sure is a pretty day.
Ken Kashiwahara, our correspondent at Edwards, has been standing by just in the event it would have been necessary for Columbia to land at Edwards, and they did have that capability. But Ken, you're not going to see any shuttle landing today.
We hope not, Frank, and we hope it'll be next Tuesday if all goes according to schedule. As you saw, it's a beautiful day out here. The weather forecast for this morning, at least, is fine. Just a few scattered clouds up above, as you saw. But one thing that concerns the weather people here is the weather. There's a storm sitting up off the Pacific, and in fact, it's over northern California now, and about 6 hours from now, this entire sky out here is expected to be covered by clouds. NASA officials here were worried that the further into November we get, the more likely we would have a possibility, rather, for a storm coming in. Right now, the long-range forecast, although it's not exactly accurate, calls for clear weather on Tuesday for the scheduled landing of the shuttle. Everybody here is ready, and as you mentioned, this is where Joe Engle trained, and people here are very excited about that, many of them having known him back then. The chase planes, as you saw, are ready. The convoy has been standing by for some hours and is still out on the lake bed in the event that the shuttle had to come down here for some reason or other today. Everybody is ready. All of the rehearsals are completed. And this time they are hoping to refine their procedures once the shuttle comes to a stop here and get the astronauts out in about 27 minutes as opposed to more than an hour last time. Frank?
All right, thank you, Ken, and we'll see you out there on Monday. Actually, I guess we're going out on Sunday. I'm going out on Sunday, and be there on Monday and Tuesday for the landing, which, of course, is spectacular in its own way to see that bird come down and realize where it's been, zooming around and around and around. Right now, the spacecraft is over Africa, and will enter darkness, as I understand it, over the Indian Ocean, to be able to see the Earth in darkness.
Frank, we have to wait for our day to end, for noontime to come and the sun to progress to the west, but for Joe and Dick today, they're going and seeking their own nighttime. They're probably 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon right now in their day, because that's the time zone over the Earth they're on. When they first get in orbit, it's almost like high noon over the Atlantic, and they're looking at a very reflective ocean, very bright ocean, and of course they can see a fantastic, beautiful curvature of the Earth, a horizon. And the next thing, I'm just trying to project their feelings. They'll see is land for the first time again since they left home. And they'll see the coast of Africa, and that truly will be an exhilarating experience for them. And then, generally, there's no clouds over Africa, over northern Africa, the desert. And they can see the Ajax Mountains, the Sahara deserts, the things that are so vast that we read about in history books when we were kids. They're going to be 100, 130, 150 miles above the Earth, looking at the entirety of that continent. And it's going to be, I'm excited for them.
They have a continent-wide view, don't they? Yes.
Yes. And
tell me, Gene, if I may ask, how easy is it to identify, given clear conditions? How easy is it to identify things like, for example, Gibraltar? You see that?
Yes, you can. It's easy because they study their landmarks. They study the topography and the geography of this Earth. And One thing, though, it's very difficult to get lost in space, and by that I mean if you can identify a known landmark, you can progress to another one, up the Mississippi River. You can find then places along the Mississippi. You can find even cities, St. Louis and what have you.
Could you spot cities, really?
Oh, yes, you
Minneapolis
can.
and so
Yes,
forth?
you can. But when you first look down at some of these landmarks, unless they're prominent, like Gibraltar or like the Peninsula of Florida, this kind of thing, you have to find your way. You have to sort of find where you are visually down there, and then you can work your way up and you say, there's Lake Okeechobee, or there's perhaps the China Wall, which some of us have seen from space.
The wall itself?
Yes.
You were able to identify
You
it
can track the
along?
shadow. If the sun is right,
Yeah.
if the sun is right, you can track the shadow, but you have to have some landmarks which to work your way along on the surface of the Earth.
Thank you, Gene. That's fascinating. Well, they're doing a lot of tracking at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, and we're going to go there now to Steve Bell. Steve?
Frank, what hasn't got a lot of attention, publicly at least, is that when the first of the Space Shuttle flights went up, the trajectory was not what the computers had said it would be. It was all right, it just wasn't what they had expected. And so the officials here at Mission Control were watching very carefully today to see what the change was going to be. Astronaut Joe Allen sitting with me. Joe, what happened?
What happened, Steve, as best I understand it, was nothing today. It went right up the mathematical trajectory. We called it the last time lofting, and the Capcom told John Young and Bob Crippen, you're lofting during the first ascent of the Space Shuttle.
Meaning it went up at a steeper
It
angle?
went steeper. Today it went right up the trajectory as expected, and I suspect we may have a bit of a mystery on our hands as to why it behaved properly today.
All right, did they do anything differently because of the trajectory the first time?
We did. Because we didn't understand the problem, we corrected it halfway, which is to say, we told it to go up just a little bit more shallow.
All right, here we have astronaut voices. Let's pick up Mission Control. Well,
we are coming on acquisition of signal through the Indian Ocean Station.
Processing data now through Indian Ocean.
All right, was that Mission Control?
That was Mission Control, we heard. Dan Brandenstein will try to call Columbia. He is calling him right now.
Station, configure AOS. We have you for 6 minutes.
There they are, back in control now,
also.
back in touch with the Mission Control here.
And Columbia, I have Ohms propellant pad, the cross-feed queue for you when you're ready to copy for your Ohms 2.
Getting a little feedback on this signal coming from space over the Indian Ocean, would you believe?
We have about 6 minutes remaining on this path. Go ahead. Okay, it's for your cue card, it's the cross-feed queue. It's 45.
What they're talking about is coming up on an Ohms burn. This will be another burn of those onboard rockets to put it into the final perfect orbit they're hoping for. And Al Dale recently put together a piece for us that explains to us exactly how these Ohms burns work in space so that we get into the proper orbit that the shuttle is looking for.
The two orbital maneuvering engines are located in separate pods which rest on either side of the Columbia's aft fuselage. These engines provide the thrust necessary to insert the Columbia into final orbit, to alter the orbit as required, and to slow Columbia down for re-entry into the Earth's atmosphere. Each engine provides about 6,000 pounds of thrust, only about an eighth as much power as an engine on a 747. They can be reused on at least 55 shuttle missions without a major overhaul, and then 55 more times. They make the shuttle a working space vehicle, a manned machine that can maneuver within limits where it wants to.
Thank you, Al Dale. We're now back at Houston, listening to Mission Control, talking with the astronauts now over the Indian Ocean. No transmission at the moment. I've got to give Joe Allen credit for this, although I'm going to steal it from him. They'll be crossing the international date line in just a moment, so truly is almost truly certain to have the shortest birthday on record. History. Mission Control here in Houston, back in touch with the shuttle astronauts as they're preparing now for that final ohms burn, which will come in just a couple of minutes, hoping to put the shuttle orbiter into a final and perfect orbit to make it a full go for the 5-day mission. Everything so far going just beautifully. And our coverage of the Space Shuttle Columbia continues in just a moment.